welcome back to the Life Legacy Podcast. It's always an honor to come and get to talk with you guys. And we always have phenomenal guests that sincerely have inspiring stories that have the ability to help you upgrade the quality of your life if you choose. And today is going to be a special one. Today I'm with Jon Lefrandt, and we went to just like a business brunch together, him, another colleague in mine, and we kind of had a little bit of an idea what we wanted to talk about. But talking with Jon, I felt like our conversation, we just kind of went off on our own a little bit, where I was like, I love talking with this guy. And Jon is a leader in all that he does and across a couple different industries, but more than anything, his story is so inspiring. So I'm honored that you're here and excited to dive in. So I think a good place to get going is just like tell us a little bit about your childhood and your growing up, and what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I'm super glad to be here too. I felt the same way. You never know when God can take you on so many different journeys and you meet people along that way. And that breakfast was special. So I'm glad we get to continue the conversation today. But yeah, so my childhood, it's amazing how your childhood can have such an impact in adult life. And I don't
Totally.
think I ever fully comprehended that until even the last couple of years. Um, I'm the oldest of seven children. And I spent a period of my time in the Salt Lake area. I was born in Salt Lake, but my parents were a young married couple at BYU, broke and poor. It's that kind of classic BYU story. Um, but I claim Seattle. That's where I lived from about fifth grade all the way until I went to serve a mission for my church in Japan. And those years in Seattle were just super defining. That was where my father was from. He was born and raised in the Issaquah area. And so we went to the same middle school and the same high school. And it was wonderful, a wonderful place to grow up. Um, I So in my family there are three boys and four girls, and we yeah I being the oldest I think has a lot of interesting dynamics associated with it. I think that when I talk to
100%.
my siblings, it's we all kind of have varying experiences with that. And I just kind of came out of the womb very responsible, had like this strong moral compass and desire to do the right thing. Um, that was mostly a good thing, but it also creates things like people pleasing and things that can sometimes wreak a little bit of havoc later in your life. Uh, but yeah, by and large, I had wonderful parents. They were really, really good people that taught me a lot. And I think growing up in Seattle, where it's a little bit more of a diverse background, was so rich and full for me to be able to connect with people from all sorts of backgrounds and religious, faiths and values, but wonderful people. And I think that that alone has also changed my life forever.
Hmm. I Yeah, I mean you're head of the house essentially, and everything, all the weight's on you. And from what I've heard, as the first kid, it's like they try and perfect them.
Yeah,
And so there's a lot of pressure, where I'm the fourth of fifth, and it was like, hey, I have to scream to get someone's attention here.
so
And so
true.
that's why, the middle children tend
Yeah,
to be attention whores. And
yeah.
uh but yeah, what do you feel like made you tick that was a little different than other people?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was interesting. I grew up in a family. My mom's family was very influential on our lives. My dad's family is also wonderful. My dad's parents were immigrants from Indonesia and the Netherlands.
No
And
way.
so then they met in the Netherlands and married and then immigrated to the United States after that. So, yeah, my dad's family is kind of first generation. And my mom's, though, is very all American. I mean, they came over with the pioneers to Utah, but um, all American, very high achieving bunch of people. And my mom was the youngest of five kids.
Mm.
So she had this strong desire to be like her older siblings, and therefore have me be like my cousins in the high achieving kind of realm. And um, anyways, it like I kind of said earlier, it is a wonderful thing, but it also can wreak a fair amount of havoc too, because whether intentional or unintentional, there was just a lot of pressure. I had a cousin, for example. They called him the $1 million missionary because he was a first round draft pick out of high school to play Major League Baseball. And he ended up turning down um, the team that he was going on because he was going to go on a mission, and they offered him $1 million to sign and not go, and he still went. And it was so I that was my example that
Yeah.
I had, was like, okay, I need to be that, and I'm not that. Like, I'm not um, a great baseball player. Athletics wasn't always my thing, so I felt this: am I disappointing people because I'm not able to achieve those things in those ways? So it was a little bit of a journey to
Yeah.
figure it out, and beating myself up kind of along the way, and kind of catastrophic thinking: if I don't get a 4.0, then I'm not going to get into the university that I want to go to, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's just interesting because that was never explicitly said or stated, by my parents at all. I mean, I really think that they were my biggest fans, regardless of what I did, but I just inevitably felt that weight.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, if I didn't do it right, then I wouldn't be a good example for my siblings. And I loved them and I cared about them, and I wanted to be that example for them also. So that did wreak havoc a fair amount of times.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like hearing you talk about that. It's like these are things that you'd never expect,
Yeah.
and you slowly look back at the picture that life has painted for you, and it's like, okay, John's a very high achieving human. That makes sense. It comes from his
Hmm.
mom, but like the whole time of feeling possibly inadequate, like
Yeah.
in a lot of different areas, it's like you might have not been great in baseball, but what you've created is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and
um,
even in high school, I was actually hospitalized, and it was for stress. Like,
really,
my mouth closed up, I couldn't breathe. They ran all these tests, and it was just pure stress. Like,
mm,
it was the panic of not being able to do what I wanted. I thought it was a domino effect of, like, if I don't accomplish this one thing, which at the time was to get into Brigham Young University, if I don't do that, the rest of my life is just gone, basically.
mm,
And that, obviously, and we'll get into that, is not the case at all. But it's also interesting because my oldest daughter is 17, and I see that same feeling that she feels.
yeah,
And as intentionally as I've been to make sure I don't have that happen to my child, it's like it's there, and it's a little bit innate, and it's probably a little genetic. So it's interesting. It's something to dive in, deeper on, throughout my life, of like, okay, how can I take that experience and try to, yeah, course correct that with my own children, but just help others too, so that they don't
yeah.
have to go through that same thing, because it was a challenging period for sure.
I think a lot of people that watch this show, feel that pressure of like, I want to do and be so much, one for myself or for my family. The expectations are so high.
Hmm.
I think Utah's like a very competitive comparison place where in a lot of ways there's good in that, where
Sure.
we're
Oh yeah.
pushing to high levels,
Hmm.
but at the same time there's the like I'm never good enough
Hmm.
feeling, because the person to your right might be doing a little bit more in this area.
Yeah.
And so with that stress experience, what were some of the outcomes that you learned from that, even in that time?
Yeah, and I don't know that I learned them fully in that time. I think it was interesting. Going on a mission helped me a ton.
Mm,
Like, the stress and anxiety and worry went way down. Yet it was still a stressful experience. But I think the thing that I learned in that period, though, was I was learning to rely more on Jesus Christ
mm,
and on the Savior. And when you read the scriptures, it talks about be ye perfect, and period. Sometimes we stop there and we think, okay, we need to be perfect.
mm,
But when you keep reading the scriptures, you find out that the only way that you can be perfect is through Jesus Christ, that he is what is the key to unlocking that ability to be perfect. And that is, of course, through his atonement. And that was a little hard too, because I think like as a kid, when I would study that, the atonement I felt like was only for, sinners, those people that made horrible, awful mistakes. So I tried so hard to not do that, to try and control,
Yeah.
when the reality is you need to let go and release and allow him to come help you. So that was something I learned later in life, but I think that the mission was what started that for me. And then anytime I've seen flare ups in my life where I deviate back to that kind of perfectionism mentality is when I have to go, okay, am I in alignment here? Why am I trying to rely so heavily upon myself and my abilities to control this situation? I'm never going to. And that's a big part of what this life experience is, I think, is that ability to let go and to let him lead in your life.
I love that. Some of those thoughts made me think back to prior to my mission. I had a rule that if if whatever was going on, whatever the situation was, if it's not going to affect me in 6 months,
Mm,
then I don't have the right to stress about it. It doesn't matter enough in
yeah.
life. And that kept me so composed. And I remember there were situations where people are like, how are you not
Yeah.
like tense? It's like, well, I just had this rule with myself that I made and I loved it.
Yeah.
And then when I went on my mission, I felt like every day, every, like every interaction had the alteration of someone's life where I kind of lost that. And where you do just have to rely on God, that and that trust that things will work out
Yeah.
is so important. And for example, I'm 27 and I'm still uh, trying to progress to get married, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of room where it's like, okay, where can I be proactive? And then there's this area where there's another person that has the agency to choose
Mm-hmm.
that I should be with them for the rest of their life.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's a huge decision, and there's so much that I can't control in that,
Yeah.
that I've just came to a conclusion where I think it was Gordon B. Hinckley that said, "Pray as if everything depends on God, and act as if everything depends on yourself."
Mm-hmm.
And so I've just found little goals that I can do to be proactive in that. But
Yeah.
the lesson is, um, God, the more trust you put into Him, the better your circumstances will be
Yeah.
in all, like that's all circumferencing,
Yes.
like that's everything. And it's really hard to get out of the, like, I want this now
Mm-hmm.
and I want it like this.
Yeah.
And life never, I've never seen life work like that.
Yeah.
And when I think about planning and preparation, um, I think God likes us to have a plan, and then He'll just destroy it, whatever we're
Mm-hmm.
going for. But I think that's our part, is to do what we can, and then He'll make that better if we're willing, and we'll let Him do it.
Yeah. We were reading with the kids this morning in the Book of Mormon and about the brother of Jared, though. And it is interesting. That's such an example of where there was a problem. They needed light, brings the solution and the plan. God didn't say, I'm going to give you the plan. It was still going through that. And then he's able to take that plan and amplify it. And yeah, not be so attached to it. But to your point, I love that you said there still is this ability to listen to the Spirit and act, and your efforts will be good and he will inspire you, but you can also inspire yourself. And I think it's just this, um, the purpose of coming to this life, the agency is such a huge part. And for you to also be a creator of your life is huge. But as long as you partner with God in that effort and with Christ, like that is where it just amplifies beyond, I think, your wildest dreams. And it doesn't mean that there won't be insanely hard and difficult things that come, but those can all be turned into something really wise and an incredible purpose.
Yeah, and with that, I think like the purpose of this life is to enjoy God's blessings and learn from mistakes and go through hardships,
Yeah.
like really hard things. And I think the big difference that people have if they choose to let God into their heart in life is there tends to be more reason, more understanding of hardship,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easier to take a trial and make sense of it,
Mm-hmm.
or take a trial and inspire other people through what you're going through. And so
Totally.
I know you've gone through a decent amount in your life, and
Mm-hmm.
you've found ways that have really influenced and impacted people to help them in some of their lowest, hardest moments of life. And that's one of the things that stuck out to me. I love people that are around inspiration and want to help.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go a little bit over there.
Yeah.
Tell us about, after your mission, what all, or yeah, how your hardships kind of started, and how have you been able to make something beautiful out of it?
Yeah. So and maybe I'll just bookend that a little bit with my
Yeah.
mission. So, when I was 19, I got my mission call, and I got it on the 26th of December. So it was the day after Christmas. And I vividly
Merry
remember my
Christmas.
dad, he was headed off to work, but he got the mail and he came right back and we opened up my call. And it was interesting. In high school, I struggled with foreign languages. I took French, kind of hoping that French would take me European in on my mission, just with my family that lived in the Netherlands. And even though my last name is not French, it's Dutch Indonesian. I thought, okay, you do those things as a kid, thinking that God will do something with that, and that I'm setting a foundation of where I'm going to go. But anyways, I opened up my mission call and I got called to Sendai, Japan. And I remember when I got it, I just like started sobbing because I was like, I can't even do French, like how am I going to do Japanese? And I remember my parents took me that night to go eat sushi for the first time, and I was like, I am not touching this. Like there is no way. And it was just the raw nigiri, and but my mission was a phenomenal experience. It completely changed my life. There were amazing experiences where I just had to trust in God. And as it related to the language specifically, that was such a scary point for me. And I remember about 6 months into my mission, we had a big mission conference and they had a speaker there. And my assignment, they handed me the mic and they wanted me to translate from English into Japanese for the Japanese missionaries. And I'm like, you're kidding me. I've been out for 6 months. Like there is no way I have the language down to do this. But that was the beginning of me just saying, all right, I'm going to take this mic and I'm going to open my mouth and I'm just going to talk. And the missionaries, maybe they were just being nice, but they just were like, it was perfect. You did so amazing. And I'm like, it was from that point forward, I kind of then again learned that even with the most impossible things, like learning a foreign language like that, that God will make miraculous things happen. So, not to go deeper into my mission, but the end of my mission, it was about 3 days before the end, and my mom and my dad and my sister, just younger than me, Jeanette, they were scheduled to come to Japan. I had a 10-day trip planned, and they were going to come pick me up. And I was so excited about it, so excited about it. And at about 6 o'clock in the morning, my mission president called me, which was a little surprising. And he said, Jon, I need to tell you something. Your parents aren't going to be coming to Japan to pick you up. Your dad has stage 4 brain cancer, and he has to go in for brain surgery as quickly as possible. And then he also let me know and that your uncle, my uncle Jim, also had been diagnosed with terminal melanoma. And both of these men were in their 40s. They had 7 children each. Both had missionaries out in the field. And all of a sudden, our life just completely turned upside down. That was like the gut punch of all gut punches in my life. So I canceled everything and got a flight home. And while I was on my mission, my family moved to Arizona. And I landed in Arizona, didn't know anyone there, obviously, but we went straight from the airport to the hospital, and my dad had just come out of brain surgery, and I spent my first night home from my mission in a chair right next to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, going back to that phone call with the mission president,
Yeah.
had you known about the cancer? Had you nothing?
Nothing. That was, yeah, cold turkey.
And so
Like
what is
minutes
running
before,
through?
I'm thinking my family is days away from getting on a plane, to everything just changed, you know? Yeah. Really jarring.
Yeah.
Especially when, you're on your mission, and back then we didn't have FaceTime and social media. It was, I talked to my family on Christmas and Mother's Day for 1 hour each time, and that was it. So, yeah.
So what does that do to you for the next couple days?
It was such a whirlwind, right? Like anytime you finish an experience like that, there's excitement, there's a lot of memories and reflection. Like there's sadness. Uh, It it was a blur. You know what I mean? It was trying to still, I don't know, soak up that experience to say goodbye to everyone. Um, but then having no clue what my reality was going home. And again, when I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So my mom needs me, my siblings are going to need me. The youngest was 6, at the time. What is that going to do to my plans going to school? I had no idea what that all
Just
looked
puts an
like.
atomic bomb
Totally.
on your
Totally.
life.
And brain cancer is an interesting one. 80%, or at least this was the statistic then, but um, 80% of people diagnosed with brain cancer die within 6 months. So that's the prognosis. There was a lot of hope, but yeah, that was, what we kind of had to wrap our brain around. But then also wanting to take the faith that I had gained through those 2 years to come home and say, like, we can work for the miracle. Let's put all our faith in that we can be a part of that 20%, that beats this brain cancer. So it was trying to gear up for that too. But yeah, it was a blur.
Mm. And so what kind of continues to happen since, all right, now you have day one,
Mm-hmm.
you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
What follows?
Brain cancer is also a really interesting thing. I think a lot of people, when they have it, it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Um, Unfortunately, my dad, he transitioned into a very different person. And it was because of a lot of the stress and pressure of the inflammation on the brain. And I think the only thing I could liken it to would be like extreme bipolar disorder, but also like the Energizer Bunny for a while. Like sometimes, and he would get hyper fixated on things. He would get this, the doctors call that hyper religiosity. He would fixate, and then it would just kind of spiral, almost like Beautiful Mind, if you've ever seen that Russell Crowe movie, and all of a sudden he'd be up, drawing all of these plans, and it's kind of starts scaring the kids, and um, was really hard. There were times that we found him. He left the house at like 5 o'clock in the morning and started knocking doors to tell people about Christ, and you're like, where does this come from? But he has staples and stitches in his head. It was really, really hard for many, many months. I did end up going to school up at BYU. And that was hard to leave my mom and the kids. So it was this
Yeah.
constant tension of like, do I keep going with my life plans, or do I let this event happen to me and I need to change my plans? And so it was this, again, my uber responsibility side, wanting to be there. It was just a lot of conflict internally, but then dealing with really, really high kind of volatile stress associated with his erratic behavior that I knew was absolutely the disease. It wasn't who he was as a person. But it was jarring and embarrassing at times. You'd take him out in public, and all of a sudden, the people he would talk and say things to, it was just, but it was the disease. I can look back at that and reflect and understand it a little bit better. But going through it, and there's not really a playbook again because so many die so fast that you're kind of lost and just trying to navigate it. But the impact it had on him professionally and financially and all that was just worrisome for sure.
Yeah, that's heavy. And now you're essentially the head of the home for real, because your dad's not in a positive state where he
Yeah.
can help out a ton, I imagine. And so leaving home had to have been hard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to anyone going through those types of trials where a father figure isn't possibly playing to his full role, like
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you give to them? How can you
You
help the
know,
family?
it's interesting. I feel like, again, you try and control the outcome. You kind of think that that life is a game of inputs and outputs, and it just isn't. But it did set me on a trajectory of a theme for my life that is interesting. My wife comments on it quite frequently, but it's just, for whatever reason, my purpose or experience in life is some people have amazing individuals in their life that can bless them, and they have a father or a mother that is able to be phenomenally present for their whole life and be these wonderful mentors. And I think my lot in life has been, and for those that go through something similar to this, and I'm ultimately grateful for it, but it's that our heavenly Father is our Father. And yes, I love my mortal father, and there is a special, unique bond there, always and forever. But he, God doesn't leave us alone. He is incredibly mindful of us, and he is there if we choose to turn to him. And he gives us the ability to pray and receive that revelation. And that's what's amazing. And so I think and it took me a while to learn that lesson. It was, and I often tell people, when you go through an extreme experience like that, you can do two different things. And we often lead with the why God, mentality of we're wanting to almost curse God. Why would you allow this to happen? And for me, it was so confusing to go, I gave my heart and soul as a missionary for 2 years. And this was my reward. You're promised all of these blessings, and this is what I got.
Yeah.
And, so for those first 10 months or so after, I would say it was a steady decline in my faith, of just why God I was kind of cursing, through that process. And there was a moment about 10 months after that, and we were with my uncle, and he kind of was the only one that could help us mediate. We couldn't like communicate with my dad. And one night we were at his house. They lived in Alpine, and it was my mom, my dad, my uncle, my sister, and me. So again, this kind of same group of people that was going to go to Japan, and we're kind of the brain trust trying to like navigate this. And I remember breaking down to him at that point, and I just said, "We are going through a living hell." And he said something really wise to me. He just said, Jon, you're not going through hell. He's like, you're going through your Gethsemane. And it was interesting in that moment, I realized that it all started clicking in a different direction. Okay, if Christ himself, the Son of God, comes to the earth, and then you think of the amount of suffering he had to go through, and then you go through great people like Joseph Smith or whatever, and the insane amount of persecution, hardship, death, loss, you start to realize that this is a part of the mortal experience, that is not where you go and curse God. If we're wise in that regard, instead of cursing and asking why, we'll get curious and ask why. And you'll say, why am I having this experience? And what can I do with this experience? And that's hard to go through in the moment, especially if your first experience of devastating loss, as you know. But God will use all of it for good. and there can still be amazing blessings. So that's, I don't know, my advice or counsel would be to get curious with that. It's okay to express anger. It's okay. I think God's even okay if we curse him sometimes, but it's not to stay in that bitter place for very long. And it's okay to then, and hopefully we then transition over to the, all right, I'm humble, I'm listening, let's talk.
Yeah.
Like, what do we need to do with this?
Yeah. When you think about religious leaders that have gone through hardship too, like you think about uh, the apostle Peter, how
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the most elect people they 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 thrash out and they do things in not the best form.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that's one of the most beautiful things about um, God and the gospel is he gives every one of us this opportunity to better our lives. And he could have put, for the 12 apostles, Jesus
Yeah.
could have chose, the most elect Pharisees. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the people were the lowest level of humanity in that time,
Yeah.
that he chose to be
Mm-hmm.
the greatest leaders on the earth for
Mm-hmm.
Christianity and for the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's so much beauty in that,
Totally.
that he can take any one of us and create the most beautiful thing and put us through really hard things,
Yeah.
and it can turn us into diamonds.
Yep.
The refiner's fire, it's a real thing that everyone has to experience, and it's on their own scale,
Yeah.
and whatever God knows that you can go through.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, for some reason or another, go through extremely hard things, and it's never a positive thing to compare
Yeah.
hardships.
Totally.
And there's no reason for it. And it if you do, it's just like, oh well, mine's meaningless. This
Yeah.
guy, someone just lost their full family, or
Mm-hmm.
you think of like the Holocaust, like things like that. And it's like,
Totally.
well, why am I here to complain? But I think the personal relationship with God, it gives you that freedom to,
Mm-hmm.
ask God why. And I love the perspective of like how to ask God why,
Mm-hmm.
and why you're asking God why.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah.
So I bet the listeners want to know, what ended up happening with your father,
Mm-hmm.
and what went forward.
Yeah. So we continued on around kind of that 10-month period. My dad did start turning a corner, and he was in remission for a year and a half, which was amazing. He was never the same. He was much more subdued during kind of that period, very kind of soft and somber. I think it was so traumatic for everyone before. We were grateful that he was subdued and not out knocking doors at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing those things. But he was never quite the same. But we still had some amazing things that happened, during that period. I was able to get married, and my dad was able to be at our wedding, and we had my first child, Lily, and she was 10 months old at the time that he passed. And when the cancer came back, it kind of just came back with a vengeance, and that happens sometimes. And he actually contracted spinal meningitis, and you couldn't, spinal meningitis is treatable, but you can't do both the brain cancer and the spinal meningitis at the same time. So I remember being up in Salt Lake at the hospital, and the doctor sitting us down and saying, basically, we'd like you guys to choose how he's going to die. Is it going to be from brain cancer, or is it going to be from spinal meningitis? And there weren't a whole lot of pros on either option, and it's a decision you would never want to wish upon anybody, So we had to make that decision, and ultimately brought him home and had in-home hospice care for him during that period. And so in September of that year of 2008, he passed away after a 3-year battle with cancer. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The I've been learning a ton about the cancer world through the Your Life Legacy documentaries that we've done, and
Mm-hmm.
as well just people's stories, and
Yeah.
the depth and the hardship of a cancer journey
Yeah.
is pretty unseen unless it's internal in your life, in your family.
Yeah. It's a lonely journey for sure for those that go through it. And yeah, but it's a transformative journey, but
Yeah.
it's lonely for sure.
Yeah. So, I know your story, and I want everyone to realize like how you've been able to make your mess your message and how you've been able to help people.
Yeah.
So how have you been able to do it?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I went on walkabout for a little bit after my dad died. Just that reality. He died in September of 2008, and for those that remember, that was the recession. And my dad was a commercial real estate developer, and I had been trying my best to help him with his business, kind of in between, his battle. But there was no way I could take care of any of his real estate assets and the things that were going on there. So um but then the market crashed, properties values cut in more than half, really quite tumultuous, very stressful on my mom now having to raise kids as a widow. I'm a young newlywed. I graduate from BYU. I end up getting my master's in real estate development up at the U, but that honestly was a little bit more just it's the recession. I mean, I had friends that the best job they could get was at Home Depot after their college grad. I mean, it was just really, really hard. Um, but I had some friends from BYU, and it was an eclectic group of people that I knew at BYU, but they were all working for a funeral pre-planning business up in Portland, Oregon. And this was about 2011, 2010. 2011-ish, that they reached out to me and they said, this business is growing. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? You're working in the funeral industry? Like, this is weird. And but I thought it's the recession, everyone's struggling. But they flew me out to Portland, and I was kind of intrigued. It was August, I remember, and the Northwest in August is just stunning. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll come fly out and hang out with you guys and see them and see the Northwest, and yeah, we'll check out this business. But in my mind, I thought, there's no way I'm doing this. But I went up there, and that was a pivot point for sure in my life. At first, I was intrigued about a business model that was growing during a recession. I didn't want the tumultuous up and downs of real
Yeah.
estate. And I grew up with that of my dad. It was feast and famine with all of his projects. But so when I realized, oh, like, yeah, death doesn't stop regardless of what the economy is, I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And then seeing that it was an industry that needed a lot of help, and it was great people that were doing it. So I said, let's give it a go. So we moved up to Portland, and I was with that business for about 6.5 years in various roles. And in that time, that business had just reached 100 million in annual sales for the first time. But then
Is that Percoa?
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from that period until I finished with them, I believe we were in the 350, 400 million range. So saw a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
growth. So insane experience with business and growing business with good people and doing meaningful work. But it was purpose driven for me. I knew that I would be able to tap into my personal experience with loss. And there was something that was intriguing and compelling to me about that of, I can turn my pain into purpose. And that is really cool. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there as pain. And so that was intriguing. And I did. I channeled it. And I would say I was wildly successful. And a big part of that was probably because of that personal experience with loss. That's just a differentiator that as a young professional in that space, not many people had had that experience
Mm.
before, right? So that started on that path. And in about 2015, I had an experience that like will forever change my life, but a very vivid experience that just said you're supposed to start your own business. And there was nothing more terrifying than that. It's like, I don't want to do this. Um, so for about 3 years, it was starts and stops. And there were times that I had wind at my sails and times that I'm like, fear would kick in and I would really dig my heels in of, I don't want to do this, and trying to make what I had going. That's a good thing. I can just stay, because there wasn't anything drastically wrong with my job. but it was just that God had a different plan for me. And that was a huge wrestle of what that was going to be like. And in those moments, you never feel, especially as a young person raising a family post recession, so there's not a lot of savings saved up. Um, you'll never be prepared financially to do some of those things. And I wasn't trained in the way. I got my undergraduate degree from BYU in advertising and marketing, but I didn't have a lot of entrepreneurial skills. I didn't know what I needed. It was in my mind, I thought, well, you need to bootstrap a business. That's what you do. That's the financially responsible thing to do. And so, anyways, it was a challenge. It was a lot of twists and turns, a ton of question marks of how I was going to be able to do it. Um, and but it was that faith journey for me was just so powerful to be able to see that there were times that the water was still and God let me rest for a little bit, and times where there was urgency and I had to keep going before I finally made the leap. But there's that old adage of leap and the net will appear. And that's ultimately, I think, what happened when I finally took the leap in 2018. So,
At least for me, with starting a company,
mm-hmm.
I think it's been one of the more spiritual experiences I've had in my life. And it's like you never put yourself comparable to God, but this was the most like creating.
Yeah,
Creating is,
mm-hmm.
God's one of his
100%.
greatest skills that we know of. And so I've always felt so much connection with pain to purpose,
Mm-hmm.
just like you.
Yeah,
And creating has been such a spiritual experience that I wasn't expecting to this level,
mm-hmm.
that I've loved. And yeah, the hardship of getting a business off the ground
Yeah,
is crazy.
totally.
And and so it's like, yeah, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's a little psychotic, and you have to be a little psychotic to
Yeah,
some degree,
mm-hmm.
or have like a purpose driven idea experience that,
Yeah,
it's like, all right, this is do or die,
yep,
and I'm going to do it.
yeah,
And when you get to that level, I think the belief system, you realize that the possibilities are endless,
mm-hmm.
and you can get little taste of wins along the way, and
Yeah,
it's incremental,
mm-hmm.
but it's going.
Yeah,
And so tell us about your business.
yeah.
What'd you do?
Well, and it's interesting too. I think there's different types of entrepreneurs. There's definitely ones that are very ego and money driven. And it's like, I want to build the next unicorn and blah, blah, blah. And look, those people can also be successful for sure. Some people that just have this insane drive and they can change the world in their own right. And I think that the thing that has been neat for me to see is those that are a little bit more purpose and God driven. Those entrepreneur stories are very compelling to me. I relate to them a lot because when I got that first little bit of revelation to do it, I mean, I sobbed for like 6 months straight, legitimately. Every time I even thought about it, it was just overwhelming. But I received such specific instruction of what I was supposed to do. And that is a huge blessing. And I know that not
Yeah.
everybody gets that, but I wrote it all down. And I have a pretty lengthy document. It sits on my phone. It's still there. And it was more or less the roadmap of what I was supposed to do. And it still is very tender to me because I think I've just realized like God is in the details of our lives, and he does care absolutely about what we do and who we do it with and how we do it. It wasn't so minute, but it was the vision and the roadmap was kind of was definitely painted for me. And it's so great to look back on that because it strengthened my faith of like, it's just beyond
Details.
my wildest, you know what I mean? It's amazing how you can take someone that of my own accord, I would not have been able to do what we've done. There's no way, because my mortal mind would go into panic mode, fear of failure, catastrophic thinking. But when I had this to rely on, then it was anytime those roadblocks came,
You
it
have your
was like, I
foundation.
have confidence that we're going to be able to move forward. And so it's gone through lots of twists and turns, but so it is, I have 3 different businesses that are still active and doing amazing things in the funeral space. And kind of took that experience that I learned with Precoa and helped diagnose other pain points, both for the families that funeral homes were serving and the funeral homes themselves. And both of those audiences are phenomenal people that need a lot of help. The funeral profession is filled with very purpose driven, calling, almost spiritual, people that just take care of the dead. And which is obviously near and dear to my heart. But then hearing the voice of these customers and seeing what they need and knowing that that wasn't fully fulfilled was where I said, gosh, we've got to bring some solutions to the table. So the three different businesses, one of them is a sales and marketing organization that helps people pre-plan and prepay for their funerals in advance. It's all done in partnership with the funeral home and always on behalf of the funeral home. That business is called Domani Pre-Need, and they're doing great things. And then the second business, we just recently rebranded, and it's the larger of the businesses in its breadth and what it's been able to accomplish. But it was called Domani Care before, and Domani is Italian for the word tomorrow. And so we kind of did a play on that. That was called Domani Care. We recently rebranded it to Alevia in April. That one is partnered with 1,500 locations across all 50 states and Canada. Last year, we did follow up, is what the program does, with families after the service. And it's a text message based nurture program, all with live humans. But we dialogue with families at meaningful events all along that first year. So the first message will be about 3 weeks after the funeral. And we just check in on them to see how they're doing, that we know how hard this time can be, and we just wanted to make sure they're doing okay. And there's no question that's even asked in that campaign at all, but we see over a 50% response rate on it, and then our live responders dialogue with them. But we do it at other meaningful events, so we'll do it at the birthday of the deceased. Our holiday period is the most busy period of the year for us. Last year we did 600,000 messages through our system. And then we finish on the 1 year anniversary of the death. And that's the most meaningful message for me, because very often the response is, thank you so much. You're the only person that remembered. And it's like gut wrenching. But when we can help businesses foster this beautiful connection, this human connection with people, then the business opportunities have always kind of figured themselves out. I haven't stressed too much about that. It's been more, if we can provide insane value with these needs and we can do it with care and compassion and empathy, like, it will do what it's supposed to do. And that's exactly what's happened, is we've been able to see that grow at a great rate. And it's been really awesome. And then the third business is a grief support platform called For Grief. And it's at forgrief.com. And that one also came from listening to what these people were saying via text message. They were asking for grief resources. And I always would think that the funeral home would have ample resources, but I found out pretty quickly that they didn't. And it was, when I would ask the funeral homes, they'd be like, well, we have some pamphlets that they can come pick up. And put yourself in the shoes of the bereaved. I'm like, we've got to do more than pamphlets. So that was where we developed For Grief. And that is a free grief support platform that we do in partnership with the funeral homes. And we have hundreds of thousands of visitors that have come to that platform as well. And we're able to, I call it Grand Central Station for grief. Instead of just going to the great abyss of Google and trying to find something, I've been able to bring all of these great national best-selling authors and Today Show and CNN contributors here, and then I can bring all the grievers here, and then they can get the support that they need. Because that was always a challenge for grief support experts too, is they can't reach them at what I call the epicenter of their loss. They usually get to them several years later. And that was my experience. I didn't get help for about 5 years after my dad died, and that wreaked some pretty major havoc. So I'm trying to shorten that and say, how can we give support to these people when they need it? Yeah.
I mean, talk about someone that has taken one of their hardest moments of their life and just created the most beautiful, it sounds like a safe place for people in their worst moments. And that's so amazing that you've been able to do that. And obviously it's been strategic and really well thought out. And it sounds like God was a big part of the vision and the plan.
Totally.
That that made me think of an experience where I was on my mission. I was just reading the Book of Mormon,
Mm-hmm.
and I just got hit with this message that and it wasn't words out loud, but it was a clear thought in my mind that that was not my own words or thoughts.
Mm.
And it was, Jackson, your life purpose is to positively influence hundreds of thousands of people's lives, to help them make a pivotal change that'll forever upgrade the quality of their life.
Hmm.
And as soon as I realized that, it completely altered my life and the trajectory of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Before my mission, it was like, okay, when I'm 35, I want to be retired,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I just want to travel the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and now it's like, I don't know if I'll ever retire.
Totally. Yeah.
um, but I bring that up just because I love that God was in the details, and then you listened, and through the fear and the hardship of the first 6 months, you're
Mm-hmm.
like, we're in a horrible spot in the economy and all
Yeah.
these things, like, um, and to just know where you're at now, where I believe it's, you guys were a part of 6% of all funerals across the U.S.
Yeah.
Like, and you're
And
helping
growing. Yeah.
helping them at such a purposeful way that's so special.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. We're gonna at the end of this year, we'll have helped our 1 millionth funeral. Will be at the end of December is when we'll hit that. So it's mind-boggling, right? And like, how can you? And that's where I say, when you go back to the why God, I don't. It it's hard. Sometimes I think people in grief, when you lose someone, um, like moving on from that loss can feel really painful. And I guess, like, for me, as it relates to that, the asking God is pretty incredible. That God can take the most devastating circumstances of your life and turn them into something so incredibly beautiful
yeah,
is such a testimony to me that, yeah, now when hard things happen, and more hard things have certainly happened in my life, this was not all smooth sailing by any means, and we're still going through a lot of different things, but that whole concept of getting curious and getting curious faster and saying, all right, Heavenly Father, like, what are we going to do with this? What do I need to learn? And I think of Eve, right, in the Garden of Eden. She says, it is better that we should pass through sorrow. And I believe in that wholeheartedly. There's beauty. It's part of the whole mortal experience. We are here to go through insanely hard things, but when we partner with God in it, that is where joy is found. That is where purpose and meaning is found. And He will take that miserable experience and
yeah,
can amplify it to the point where it can touch millions of people for good.
yeah,
Always. That can happen. It doesn't matter if you were a person in the Holocaust, to your point. There were some that they came out and did beautiful things, with their life, from something that, if I thought I had to go through that, I would lose all hope and faith in humanity. Like, you can see how your soul would be gone. But if we allow God to enter
yeah.
in, He does some amazing work through healing.
I think the big word that you said right there at the end is allow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I used to always, I've always been a very happy, optimistic human,
Mm-hmm.
like innate within myself.
Yeah.
And I'd always see like these 80-year-olds that were so angry, or just people that seemed to, like, just be fed on negativity and spew it out.
Yeah.
And like, how is that possible? And it comes from, I think, not allowing those hardships to become something beautiful. And it's really hard to do, but it's that allowance with God that it's like, hey, let's make something of this. And it's a choice. It's perspective. It's a choice. And it's on you if you're going to let that happen. And if you do, then you can have outcomes like what John has had with his businesses and, life experience. And also, I'm sure your life hasn't been perfect, and it's not
And
easy.
it won't be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think it's amazing that we have the choice to do that. And again, back to agency, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you can have these things ruin your life forever, and people do all the time.
Yeah.
I'd say on average or more, it would be more on the slanted side of like
Yeah.
you're gonna have a hardened life,
Hmm.
and so it's a choice that's really important to make, in any part of the hardship. You from the first 5 minutes after, you can try and choose
Yeah.
to find the outs, and from my experience, it's been a lot more positive when I try and do the positive why,
Yeah.
because you can choose the negative why, but which question or version of why is going to lead you to a better life?
Yes.
And I think an important thing that you can add so much value to is the grief journey.
Hmm.
And, like with all that data and um, working with, you're going to hit your millionth funeral. What, what can you tell families, and what are a couple of good procedures or things that are good to know when you have no idea about the grief world, or you're
Yeah.
planning a funeral, any of that stuff?
Yeah, you'd think I'd be an expert by now, but but it's, every journey is unique. Grief
Totally.
is not a linear experience. There's different phases and stages of grief, but it isn't that you go from 1 to 2 to 3. It can bounce all over the spectrum. I think we talked about this, and I think it's important to share this. I'm obviously in a much better place as it relates to my grief with the loss of my father. It's now been 16 years since he passed away. And yet last year, the most interesting thing happened to me. I had an anaphylactic shock episode. I'm not allergic to anything. So at first, I go and I do all the allergy testing and I'm carrying around my EpiPen. It was very scary. I mean, I was rushed to the ER. My wife literally thought I was dying. I completely inflamed up. But it was like after a day of fasting. So there was no food that I was eating. And it was just kind of bizarre. Anyways, all the tests came back, wasn't allergic to anything. Flash forward to about 3 months, and I had a second anaphylactic shock episode. Same thing, rushed to the hospital, flared up. The only common denominator of those two events was grief. And the first one was my dad's birthday, and the second one was the anniversary of his death. So 16 years later, to a person that works in and with and around grief and loss all the time, can have a physical reaction. So I called one of my grief experts. Her name's Megan Reardon Jarvis, and she specializes specifically on grief in the body. And I'm like, Megan, can this happen? And she's like, absolutely. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm still learning, is the point of that, is that grief is it's complex. Um, what I think I would just say to that, though, too, is all of us have grief. That is a human experience as well. It doesn't matter if it is loss of a divorce, loss of a job, loss of a life that you once had, loss of money, or physical loss, or it could be loss of a limb, an illness that changes your life. So many different things can happen to us, but it is a human experience, and every one of us has it. And I think when I've talked to therapists before too, at the core root of most problems, if not all, and you peel the layers of this onion back, grief is kind of at the epicenter of those problems. So when you look at a drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever the case may be, it's not just the chemical addiction that's there. If you get to the root why, it's often stemmed in a grief experience that's there. So it's accepting that and realizing that we all will experience and are experiencing some semblance of grief. And then it's moving forward with it. And I think that for me, as I've now, from the anaphylactic side, I'm like, all right, it's not that I need to go get allergy meds so that I can avoid anaphylaxis. It's I got to dive deeper to understand what is this root underlying thing. And it's been, therapy's been phenomenal for me as a therapist has been able to outline the different traumas in my life. And the grief one was a complicated one because it was prolonged grief from the time that I found out the news via that phone call that he had been diagnosed to when he died was a 3-year experience. So that
Mm.
was like elongated. But then the aftermath of that, again, with me being the oldest and having all of these kids, and it brought my new baseline down to like 0. And so what I ended up doing was I kept trying to have these 10 experiences that were amazing. So my high achieving, perfectionistic, driven self would try to have these. And what would happen is I would spike, and then the drop would be so heavy that it would be down there and I couldn't get myself out. So what I've been working on is just trying to have more very simple,
Mm.
normal, healthy, non volatile experiences to get myself out of that. And then the highs won't be quite as high, maybe, but the lows certainly won't either.
Mm.
And you need to kind of navigate that. So for me, that was something that was helpful. But I think that, yeah, with grief in particular, it is important to just start talking and being honest and open with whatever the emotions you are feeling and putting words behind it. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to be bitter. It's okay to be upset and frustrated and mad. Those are human emotions too. And it's then, what do you want to do with those? And there's lots of things that are just very subtle, but it's taking it one step at a time. And for me, it's just that incremental progress is really the key. It's what's that next best step that I
Yeah.
need to take, instead of I wanted to
Giant
be perfect
wins.
and I wish I didn't have this loss in my life. It's you do. The book, have you read Option B? Sheryl
No.
Sandberg. So
Uh-uh.
good. Sheryl Sandberg, Adam Grant. She's the COO of Facebook, or was with Zuckerberg. And when she was on a trip in Mexico, her husband dropped dead on a treadmill. They had 2 young kids back home. And so she just says that. She's like, when option A fails, and I'm not going to swear, but she says, kick the shiz out of option B, like make it happen. And it's that pivot of just, okay, accept option A is now gone. Let's now move on to option B and let's just do the best job that we can with it. And how do we make incremental progress? But it's an awesome book. I recommend.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's um it's been so fun getting to talk about this stuff. And for you, what do you feel like is kind of coming next? Like what are you loving in life? What what's the legacy kind of that you want to leave behind with everything?
I think if I've learned anything, in my journey, it is, we talked about this at the very beginning, but it's letting go of control. So sometimes even answering that question can be hard because, yes, I have agency and God wants me to kind of charter my own path. But if I've learned anything in life, I also know that sometimes that plan will be hijacked.
Yeah.
It's my family may not come to Japan now. What am I going to do? And, being an entrepreneur and the twists and turns that come there. And so it's remaining open while keep moving forward steadily with that and listening to kind of the promptings of the spirit and then being very open and not afraid of whatever that next thing is. And so it is interesting. The businesses are all doing very well and there's new twists and turns and developments that we're creating with it. Um, but really trying to dial in, well, what is my unique strength and just kind of gift to the world and being open to that too. And it's, I don't know, it's going to be a journey. I mean, yeah, I have kind of my 5, 10 year, type plans, but I think too, I listened to a song that came out this morning, Ben Rector. Do you listen to Ben Rector at
Yeah,
all?
I like them.
But he just came out with 3 new songs and one's called The Richest Man in the World. And I just like had a nice teary moment on the right end where he just talked about he actually talked about his funeral. He said, at my funeral, I hope that no one's going to talk about how I was an amazing singer and I performed in front of, thousands of people. For him, it came down to, I have a baby girl and 2 boys that love me. Talks about his wife. And he even said before he released these 3 songs that he's going to kind of take a break from touring because he wants to focus on what's most meaningful in life. And I was like, anyways, it was super tender. But I think that's the most important thing. Like, I love my wife and my kids, and I'm so grateful that we've been able to do this journey together. I wouldn't have been able to do it without my wife. She's amazing. Um, but it's like, what I don't know, that's the core. I never want to lose that. And so if it means that I sometimes sacrifice being that unicorn, maybe, if God wants it to be a unicorn, he'll help make that happen. But it's just always wanting to like prioritize them, and helping them in any way I can, and anyone else that God kind of puts, in my path, of just being kind of that tool and that instrument. And I think that's what this is so cool too. It's how can we amplify the conversations and the voices? These are normal human experiences that everyone can have, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But yeah, I want to be that richest man in the world, that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what success I achieve in business or financially. It really is more about those people. It's like that the 1 million people is more important to me than the value of my business all day long.
Definitely.
And so whatever I do, I want to always make sure I don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, I love that. I forgot who talked about it, but they were defining success and what that looks like, and it's that when they're old, their kids and grandkids choose to come visit them, and they're their best friends.
Yeah.
And I think life is so complicated at times and can be so complex, but sometimes it's just good to take a second and just I love grateful thought processes, because you just realize what matters. And it always goes back to family and helping people feel better in life and real human experience and connection. That's what is beautiful in life and what matters. And I think God cares about that a lot.
Absolutely.
There's two meditations that I do that's kind of changed my life. One, I put on songs that don't have any words, and I go for about 10-15 minutes and think about every moment I've had in my life that's been amazing, and I just sit in it and I get to enjoy it over and over again. And then a following day later, or following couple days later, I look at all my beautiful experiences that I'm going to have and I envision them. And that always helps me whenever there's confusion of what I should do next in life, or like, where things are going, where I want things to go.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the greatest driving forces, to look back at what I've absolutely loved in life and then look forward to what I'm excited for. And that helps me prioritize the present of what I'm going to do.
I love that.
And I invite everyone to try it. It's so cool.
Yeah.
And I just think you've shared a lot of special things. As we wrap up, is there anything that you want to say to our listeners?
Yeah, there was one thing I was listening. I was in Houston this week speaking at a conference, and I went to go visit my friend. He's a mission president in the Houston South Mission, and it was a really cool experience. But if you've been in Houston, there's a lot of traffic. And so I put on a master class that Jay Shetty taught, and it was on change. And, we live in a world where we fear change. We don't want it. We kind of dig our heels in. We try to find comfort and protection as much as we possibly can. But he said something that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And he said this. He said, "You need to anchor your identity not to what you do, but to why you do it." And I love that. I mean, it's a little bit of a spin on Simon Sinek's, start with why. But I think as I look at my life, my 40 years of life so far, that's been probably the most transformative thing. And I think it's just what we just talked about. It's why am I doing what I'm doing every day? And without that why, it's going to be harder to get out of bed. It's going to be more painful to get out of bed. It's going to be easier to want to quit and to give up. But that why is so important. So it's not necessarily, that what the business, and growing business, that can sometimes be just the means to it. But the why really is to, for me, use the power of human connection to change people. And that's the core. And fostering and creating environments where that can happen is what is so meaningful. So yeah, I'll drop just about anything to go to a breakfast with someone like you that I've never met before and say, let's connect for breakfast. And I have no idea what that means, but now it's led to another great conversation on our journeys, in life, and just being open to that. That's what drives me. But it's, yeah, don't fear that change. Step into what your why is and lean into it. And if you partner with God on that journey, it's going to be a transformative experience, come what may.
Decide to say yes, and then keep God as your board advisor.
Totally.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time today. This has been phenomenal. It's just edifying to hear. I love seeing very well-rounded, successful humans and how they've came to be. And I consider you one of them, of course, and just honored to get to spend some time with you. And to everyone at home, as always, I love you guys, and keep human connection at the forefront and keep God at the forefront of what you do and what you care about. But even deeper, like, why? Why are you doing this? And why does it matter to you? And if you're trying to understand your why better, it's a beautiful journey that's going to take some time, but keep saying yes until the why makes sense. And that's a podcast.
Love it. Thanks for having me.
You're awesome. That was cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you got some.
You're a good host.
Stuff. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's really interesting going from where I like to interview still a lot in the documentaries.
Yeah.
And in the documentaries, I'm not talking. Like the whole point of me is like
to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
You're just the prompt. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to take it from that world to
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, okay, I need to bring in my thoughts and personality and stuff. It's actually really different and like a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get better at that.
Yeah. No, you're doing great. Well, and it's interesting too. I've often thought, with podcasting specifically, you look at Oprah and I'm like, that woman is so brilliant, but it's because she has done nothing but interview tens of thousands of the most amazing people on the planet. There's no greater way to like learn and gain knowledge so that you can also just then implement it. It's really awesome. So I'm sure that's a gift too.
It's one of my favorite ways to learn.
Yeah.
That and action. It's
Yeah.
like learn from the greatest leaders. They're gonna leave a bunch of gems behind.
Totally.
And it's also the human connection side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've really loved humanizing people that just don't seem like they're human.
Totally.
And I feel like we've been able to do that decent on this
cool.
podcast, which has been fun.